Imagine living a life where you are completely free from the fear of rejection, where the opinions of others no longer dictate your choices, and where you wake up each morning knowing that your happiness is entirely in your hands. Sounds liberating, doesn't it? Yet for most of us, this kind of life feels impossible. We constantly seek approval, worry about being judged, and let our past define who we are. But what if everything we believed about happiness and success was wrong? In The Courage to be Disliked, authors Fumitake Koga and Ichiro Kishimi unravel a profound, yet counterintuitive philosophy based on the teachings of Alfred Adler, a pioneering psychologist who argued that true freedom comes from letting go of the need for recognition. Unlike Freud, who believed that the past shapes our destiny, or Jung, who emphasized hidden archetypes within us, Adler's approach is radically different. He asserts that we are not prisoners of our past traumas, but rather, we choose our own suffering. In other words, we are not shaped by our experiences, but by how we interpret them. Structured as a Socratic dialogue between a skeptical young man and a wise philosopher, the book dismantles the deeply ingrained beliefs that hold us back. It reveals that all human problems stem from interpersonal relationships, that the need for approval is a self-imposed burden, and that true happiness lies in contributing to others without expecting anything in return. But embracing this philosophy requires a bold step. It demands the courage to be disliked. Are you ready to challenge everything you thought you knew about happiness and step into a life of true independence? If so, this book will change the way you see yourself and the world forever. The book is structured into 5 nights chapters, where the young man challenges the philosopher's ideas, leading to deep discussions on happiness, interpersonal relationships, and self-liberation. Let's begin with First Night. Deny trauma. The past does not define you. A young man, full of doubts and frustrations, arrives at the home of a philosopher, seeking answers to life's most troubling questions. He is restless, burdened by the belief that his life has been shaped by events from his past. He feels trapped by circumstances beyond his control and believes that trauma from childhood and past experiences determine his present reality. He argues that people who have suffered hardships or have been wronged cannot simply escape their pain and change their lives. The philosopher listens calmly and then begins to challenge this perspective. He states that people are not controlled by past events, but rather by how they interpret them. He introduces the idea that people do not suffer because of their experiences, but because of the meaning they assign to them. He explains that many believe their problems originate from past traumas, but this belief is a misconception. The past does not define a person's future unless they choose to let it. The young man is skeptical. He insists that it is impossible to ignore the effects of childhood trauma or painful memories. He points out that some people are born into difficult circumstances, experience cruelty, and grow up with emotional wounds that cannot be erased. He asks how anyone could possibly move forward when such deep scars exist. The philosopher explains that instead of looking at life through the lens of cause and effect, it is better to understand it through the idea of purpose. He suggests that people do not act because of what happened in the past. Rather, they act based on what they want to achieve in the present. For example, if a person says they are unable to trust others because they were betrayed in the past, it is not the betrayal itself that prevents them from trusting. It is their current choice to avoid relationships. They're using their past as a reason to justify their present behavior. The young man struggles to accept this. He insists that people do not choose to be unhappy. The philosopher disagrees and argues that, at times, people unconsciously decide to stay in a state of suffering because it serves a certain purpose. If a person believes they cannot succeed because of their upbringing, they're actually avoiding the risk of failure. If someone refuses to form relationships due to past betrayals, they're protecting themselves from future pain. In this way, people use their past as an excuse to maintain the status quo. The young man becomes defensive. He accuses the philosopher of blaming people for their own misfortunes. He says that not everyone has the luxury of simply choosing happiness, especially when circumstances have been cruel to them. But the philosopher does not agree. He clarifies that he is not denying the existence of hardship. He acknowledges that painful experiences are real, but he insists that no one is forced to be controlled by them. A person always has the power to interpret experiences differently and to decide how to respond. The young man remains unconvinced. He argues that deep emotional wounds take time to heal and cannot simply be ignored. The philosopher replies that it is not about ignoring the past, but about understanding that people have the ability to change their perceptions of it. Instead of asking why something happened, it is more useful to ask how to move forward from it. He emphasizes that happiness is not something given by others, nor is it something lost because of past suffering. It is a choice made in the present. The young man takes a moment to reflect. He considers his own life and realizes that he has been holding on to pain as a way to justify his current struggles. He begins to understand that he is not a prisoner of his past and that he has the power to shape his own future. But still, doubt lingers in his mind. Can people truly let go of past traumas so easily? The philosopher then shares an example. He describes two people who experience similar childhood hardships. One chooses to remain bitter and blames their past for their struggles, while the other decides to use their experiences as motivation to create a better life. The past is the same, but the way each person responds to it is different. This proves that the past itself is not the determining factor. What matters is the meaning each person assigns to their experiences. The young man is quiet. He begins to see the logic behind these words, but he is still unsure. The philosopher senses his hesitation and explains that people often cling to the idea that the past defines them because it is easier than taking responsibility for the present. If someone believes they are shaped by past trauma, they can avoid making difficult changes. But if they accept that they have the power to redefine themselves, they also have to take responsibility for their own happiness. This realization can be frightening. The young man suddenly feels as though a weight is being lifted from his shoulders. He has spent so long believing that his life was controlled by events outside his control, but now he sees that he has the power to create his own future. He realizes that blaming the past is a way of avoiding the responsibility of living fully in the present. The philosopher reminds him that this way of thinking is not about disregarding pain or pretending suffering does not exist. Instead, it is about recognizing that suffering does not have to dictate one's future. Even the deepest wounds do not have the power to define a person unless they choose to let them. For the first time, the young man feels hope. He understands that the past is nothing more than a story, and he has the ability to rewrite its meaning. He is no longer bound by trauma, and he is ready to take control of his own life. He leaves the philosopher's home with a newfound sense of freedom, eager to embrace the possibilities that lie ahead. Now, let's move on to the second night. All problems are interpersonal relationship problems. The young man returned the next evening, still filled with doubts. He had been thinking about what he had heard the previous night, but something still did not sit right with him. He was struggling with the idea that past experiences did not define a person. But more than that, something else troubled him: the role of relationships in life. He had spent years trying to gain recognition from others, and if that was truly unnecessary, what was the point of it all? Wasn't human connection at the core of everything? Sitting in the same room as before, he looked at the philosopher and asked, if people do not need recognition from others, then why do we even care about relationships? Aren't all human struggles tied to the way we relate to others? The philosopher nodded and said, yes. In fact, every problem that a person encounters is fundamentally a problem of interpersonal relationships. The young man frowned. He had expected a different answer. Every problem? That's a bold statement. Some problems have nothing to do with other people. What about personal struggles, like not feeling confident or lacking motivation? The philosopher smiled and leaned back in his chair. Let's consider this. Why do you feel a lack of confidence? Is it because you genuinely see yourself as incapable, or is it because you fear being judged by others? Why do you lack motivation? Is it truly because you do not want to act, or is it because you are afraid of failing and being seen as a failure by those around you? The young man paused. He had never considered this before. Could it be that even his personal doubts were linked to his relationships with others? When a person claims to lack confidence, what they truly mean is that they are afraid of how others will perceive them. The philosopher continued. They think, what if I make a mistake? What if people laugh at me? What if I fail and others see me as incompetent? It is not the action itself that terrifies them. It is the imagined judgment of others. This is why all problems, at their core, are problems of relationships. The young man crossed his arms. But isn't that natural? Everyone wants to be liked. No one wants to be ignored or rejected. If we lived in complete isolation, none of this would matter. But we don't. We live in a society where we constantly interact with people. The philosopher nodded. That is precisely why understanding this concept is so important. People believe that they suffer because of objective circumstances, but they truly suffer because of how they perceive their standing in the eyes of others. If a person is concerned about their appearance, they are not merely thinking about themselves. They are worried about how others will judge them. If a person hesitates to speak up in a group, it is not because they do not have thoughts to share, but because they fear how those thoughts will be received. This is the root of human suffering. The young man's mind raced. He thought back to moments in his life when he had avoided taking action. He had turned down opportunities, stayed silent in conversations, and even pretended to enjoy things he did not like, all because he was afraid of how others might react. So what should we do? Are you saying we should just stop caring? That's impossible. No, I'm saying that it is possible to free yourself from this cycle. The reason people suffer in relationships is because they are constantly comparing themselves to others. They seek validation and fear rejection. But consider this. Who defines your worth? If you rely on others to determine your value, then you will always be at their mercy. If you perform well and receive praise, you feel good. If you make a mistake and are criticized, you feel worthless. You are placing your entire self-worth in the hands of others. But the truth is, no one else has the power to define you. That power belongs to you alone. The young man frowned. That sounds easy in theory, but in reality, it's different. If someone insults me, I will feel hurt. If someone ignores me, I will feel unimportant. How can I not care? Let me ask you something. If a stranger on the street calls you foolish, does it truly make you foolish? If someone ignores you, does it make you less important? The answer is no. Your value does not change just because someone else fails to recognize it. And yet, people live as though their worth depends entirely on the opinions of others. This is why they suffer. They chase approval and fear rejection, but they fail to see that they are the ones giving power to these external judgments. The young man felt a knot in his stomach. He had spent his whole life reacting to what others thought of him. If someone praised him, he felt proud. If someone criticized him, he felt ashamed. His entire existence had been shaped by external validation. But if we stop seeking approval, won't we become isolated? Won't people dislike us? That is where courage comes in. The courage to be disliked is the courage to live your own life, regardless of how others may respond. The reality is, no matter what you do, there will always be people who disapprove. Even the most respected figures in history had critics. If you live trying to please everyone, you will never truly be free. The goal is not to be disliked. The goal is to live without fearing the possibility of being disliked. That is what it means to live with true freedom. The young man sat in silence. He thought about all the times he had molded himself to fit into social circles, all the times he had hidden his true thoughts to avoid conflict, all the moments when he had let the opinions of others dictate his self-worth. He realized now that he had been living as if he were constantly being watched, constantly judged. So, if I understand correctly, suffering comes from worrying about how others see me. And if I can let go of that, I can be free. Exactly. The moment you stop seeking approval and stop fearing rejection, you become truly independent. You begin to act based on your own values, not the expectations of others. This is not selfishness. It is the foundation of a fulfilling life. The young man felt a shift in his perspective. He had spent so much time believing that his worth was something that needed to be confirmed by others. Now he saw that it had always been within him. He had been searching for validation in the wrong place. He took a deep breath and looked at the philosopher. I think I understand now. But letting go of approval is easier said than done. It's a habit that has been built over years. The philosopher smiled. Yes, it is not an instant change. But once you become aware of it, you can begin to free yourself. Each time you catch yourself seeking validation, remind yourself that your worth is not determined by others. The more you practice, the more natural it will become. In time, you will no longer be controlled by the fear of rejection. You will be able to live your own life, not the life dictated by the opinions of others. The young man nodded slowly. This was not the answer he had expected, but it was the one he needed. He realized now that the barriers he had faced in life were not placed there by others. He had built them himself, out of fear, and if he had built them, then he could also tear them down. Now, here is the third night. Discard other people's tasks. Do not seek recognition. The conversation begins with a young man expressing his frustration about how people live their lives constantly seeking recognition from others. He believes that it is natural to desire approval and that a person cannot live completely free from worrying about what others think. He argues that if someone disregards the opinions of others entirely, they will be left alone and isolated. The philosopher listens patiently and responds with a thought-provoking question. Are you living your life, or are you living according to the expectations of others? The young man is taken aback by this question. He insists that people live in society, and therefore, their happiness depends on how others see them. If someone is well-liked, they will feel happy. If they're disliked, they will feel miserable. The philosopher challenges this idea by introducing the concept of separation of tasks. He explains that many people are burdened by problems that are not their own. When someone tries too hard to gain the approval of others, they're taking on a task that does not belong to them. He asks the young man to imagine a scenario. A student is studying for an exam, but he is not motivated. His parents tell him to study harder because they want him to succeed. However, the act of studying is not the parent's task. It is the student's task. If the parents force the child to study, they are interfering with something that is not their responsibility. Whether the student studies or not is entirely his own decision. No matter how much the parents worry, they cannot take the exam for him. The young man nods, but remains skeptical. He asks how this applies to his own life. The philosopher explains that people often waste their energy trying to control things that are not within their power. If someone worries about being disliked, they are focusing on another person's task. The way others perceive someone is beyond their control, so worrying about it is a pointless burden. This idea unsettles the young man. He argues that people naturally desire approval because it gives them a sense of value. Without recognition, how can a person know they're doing well? The philosopher smiles and responds, "Who decides your worth?" The young man hesitates. He realizes that if he allows others to determine his value, he will never be free. No matter how hard he tries, there will always be someone who dislikes him. The philosopher tells him that seeking recognition means handing over control of his life to others. If he can separate his own tasks from others, he can live freely without being controlled by their opinions. Still, the young man struggles with the idea. He asks if this means a person should never care about others at all. The philosopher clarifies that living freely does not mean being selfish. It means recognizing that each person has their own path. If someone chooses to like or dislike another person, that is their task. If someone decides to work hard or be lazy, that is their task. Trying to change another person's mind is a waste of energy. The young man begins to see the logic, but he is still worried. He asks what happens if a person is completely disliked by everyone. How can someone be happy if they have no friends or support? The philosopher explains that people who focus too much on gaining approval often end up losing themselves. Instead of living honestly, they mold their personalities to fit others' expectations. This is not true happiness. He gives another example. Imagine a person who always agrees with others to avoid conflict. They smile when they're unhappy, they pretend to like things they dislike, and they hide their true feelings just to be accepted. Over time, this person will feel exhausted and empty. Even if they are well-liked, they are not truly being themselves. On the other hand, if they have the courage to express their true thoughts, they might lose some people's approval, but they will attract others who genuinely appreciate them. The young man reflects on this deeply. He realizes that much of his anxiety comes from his fear of rejection. He has spent years trying to please others, but in doing so, he has ignored his own desires. The philosopher encourages him to focus on his own tasks instead of worrying about what others think. If he does this, he'll find true freedom. The conversation continues with another challenge from the young man. He asks, if we should not seek recognition, does that mean we should never praise others either? The philosopher clarifies that praise and recognition are different. When someone praises another person, they're placing themselves in a superior position, acting as if they have the right to judge others. True respect comes not from praise, but from mutual trust and acceptance. Instead of saying, "You are amazing because you achieved something," a better way to encourage someone is to say, "I see that you are working hard, and I respect that." This kind of acknowledgement does not create a power imbalance, but instead fosters equal relationships. The young man begins to grasp the deeper message. He sees how much of his life has been spent chasing approval and worrying about others' opinions. He has avoided taking risks because he feared failure. He has changed his behavior just to be liked. He realizes that he has been living under the control of others without even knowing it. The philosopher reminds him that true freedom comes from recognizing one's own path and allowing others to walk theirs. If someone dislikes him, that is their task. If someone loves him, that is also their task. His only responsibility is to live in a way that feels right to him. If he does this, he will no longer feel trapped by the expectations of others. As the conversation nears its end, the young man feels both relieved and uncertain. He understands the lesson, but he wonders if he has the strength to live this way. The philosopher reassures him that courage is needed. It is not easy to stop seeking approval. It is difficult to let go of the desire to be liked. But if he can take even small steps toward separating his own tasks from others, he will find himself becoming freer each day. The young man thanks the philosopher and leaves deep in thought. He has learned something powerful, that he does not need to be controlled by others' opinions. He can live his own life, make his own choices, and free himself from the burden of seeking recognition. He knows that the journey ahead will not be easy, but he now has a new perspective. With each step he takes, he moves closer to a life that is truly his own. So now, here comes the fourth night, where the center of the world is live for yourself. The young man, filled with frustration, returns once again to challenge the philosopher. He has begun to understand many of the ideas previously discussed, but a new question troubles him deeply. If one does not seek approval from others, does that not mean they are simply being selfish? If a person lives only for themselves, how does that not lead to a cold, disconnected life? The philosopher listens patiently, then responds with a calm certainty that unsettles the young man. The world, he explains, does not revolve around any single individual. When a person believes that they're the center of everything, they naturally assume that all eyes are upon them. Every action they take, every word they speak, and every choice they make seems to be under constant observation and judgment. But in reality, people are far less interested in others than one might think. Each person is focused on their own concerns, their own struggles, and their own aspirations. This realization, though liberating, is difficult for the young man to accept. He resists, arguing that he has always felt the weight of expectations from his family, teachers, and society. If others have such high expectations of him, surely their opinions must matter. The philosopher smiles knowingly and explains that people's expectations are nothing more than their own desires imposed upon others. A parent who demands that their child excel in academics is often fulfilling their own dreams rather than thinking about what the child truly wants. A teacher who insists that a student must follow a rigid path to success is often projecting their own fears of failure. This is not to say that such expectations are malicious, but rather that they are separate from the individual's own life task. One cannot live according to the wishes of others without sacrificing their own freedom. If a person shapes their life based on gaining approval, they will never be able to make decisions that are truly their own. They will always be chasing an illusion, a moving target that is never within reach. The young man hesitates. He feels that ignoring the expectations of others would lead to isolation. If a person disregards the thoughts of those around them, won't they end up alone? The philosopher responds by explaining that there is a difference between rejecting people and living with self-acceptance. Living for oneself does not mean abandoning relationships. Rather, it means contributing to others in a way that does not seek reward or validation. When people act out of a genuine desire to be of service rather than to gain recognition, they begin to experience true fulfillment. The young man challenges this idea. He asks why one should contribute to others at all if approval and recognition are meaningless. The philosopher explains that the greatest joy in life comes from feeling useful, from knowing that one's existence has value in the lives of others. But this value does not come from praise. It comes from the act itself. A person who dedicates themselves to their work, to their family, or to a cause they believe in is already living a fulfilled life, whether or not they receive external recognition. A pianist who plays music not for applause, but for the love of the craft, is far happier than one who plays only to impress an audience. The young man is thoughtful now, but he is still skeptical. He asks whether people should completely disregard others' opinions. The philosopher clarifies that while it is important to respect others, it is not necessary to be controlled by their judgments. When a person lives for themselves, they do not become arrogant or dismissive. Instead, they become free. They are no longer shackled by the fear of criticism or the need for validation. They can express their true selves without hesitation. But what if someone insults or criticizes you? Shouldn't that matter? The young man presses further, trying to find a flaw in the argument. The philosopher responds that insults and criticism are only effective if one chooses to accept them. If someone calls another person a failure, it is up to the individual to decide whether or not to believe it. Words have no power unless one gives them power. If a person is confident in their path, no insult can shake them. The young man considers this carefully. He realizes that much of his life has been spent reacting to the opinions of others. If someone praised him, he felt joy. If someone criticized him, he felt shame. His emotions were not truly his own. They were dictated by external forces. The philosopher now asks him a direct question. If there were no one watching, no one judging, what would he truly want to do? The young man struggles to answer. He has spent so much time living for others that he does not know what he himself desires. The philosopher urges him to think deeply about this. To live for oneself is not to act selfishly, but to act sincerely. It means following one's heart, not in rebellion, but in alignment with one's true nature. The young man remains silent for a long moment. He realizes that his fear of rejection has held him back from many things he wanted to do. He never pursued certain interests because he feared they would not be seen as respectable. He never voiced certain opinions because he feared being laughed at. He now sees that these fears were chains, keeping him from living as he truly wished. The philosopher continues, explaining that happiness is not something given by others. It is something one creates. If a person always waits for external validation, they will never be truly happy because they will always depend on factors beyond their control. But if one finds satisfaction in their own actions without concern for praise or blame, they will experience a deeper, more lasting joy. The young man nods slowly. He begins to see the difference between selfishness and self-acceptance. Selfishness is demanding that others conform to one's desires. Self-acceptance is living in a way that remains true to oneself while respecting the freedom of others. The world does not revolve around him, and that is a liberating realization. If he is not at the center of everything, then he does not need to bear the weight of constant judgment. He is free to live as he chooses, to pursue what brings him meaning, and to contribute to others without expectation. A newfound sense of clarity washes over him. He no longer feels the need to prove his worth. He does not need to be the best, the smartest, or the most admired. He simply needs to live in a way that aligns with his own values. And in doing so, he will find not only freedom, but also a sense of belonging that is more genuine than any approval he has ever sought before. In the last and fifth night, to live in earnest in the here and now. The night was calm, and the young man sat across from the philosopher, his mind filled with thoughts from their previous conversations. He had spent days trying to understand everything, but there was still a question that troubled him. He asked whether it was truly possible to live happily in the present moment when life was uncertain and the future unpredictable. The philosopher smiled and began to speak. Life exists only in the present. Many people live thinking that happiness will come in the future. They believe that once they get a better job, earn more money, or find the perfect relationship, they will finally be happy. But this way of thinking only leads to suffering. If happiness is always in the future, then it never truly arrives. It is like chasing the horizon. No matter how much one moves forward, the horizon never gets closer. Instead of waiting for happiness to come someday, one must choose to be happy in this very moment. The idea that happiness is conditional on future achievements is an illusion that keeps people trapped in dissatisfaction. The young man was not satisfied. He argued that people needed goals. If there were no future plans, wouldn't life become meaningless? The philosopher nodded and explained that it is not wrong to have goals, but the problem begins when one focuses only on the goal and forgets about the journey. Imagine a traveler who wants to climb a mountain. If he only thinks about reaching the peak and ignores everything else, he will not enjoy the beautiful scenery along the way. Even if he reaches the top, he might feel empty, wondering what to do next. But if he enjoys every step of the climb, then every moment becomes meaningful. In this way, life is not about reaching some final destination. It is about fully living in each step, in each moment. Every action, no matter how small, carries meaning when approached with sincerity and presence. The young man leaned forward. If living in the present is so important, then does it mean that past experiences have no value? The philosopher replied that the past is nothing more than a collection of memories. It does not exist anymore. It cannot be changed. But many people live as if they're still trapped in their past mistakes and regrets. They keep revisiting old wounds, believing that those experiences define them. However, the past is simply a story one tells oneself. It is possible to change the meaning of that story at any time. Instead of seeing past failures as proof of being incapable, one can see them as lessons that led to growth. The past should not be ignored, but it should not control the present either. Just as one does not walk forward while looking backward, one cannot live fully while constantly dwelling on past experiences. The young man remained silent for a moment, then asked about the future. What about dreams and ambitions? Should people stop working towards something greater? The philosopher explained that the future is also just an idea. It does not exist yet. Many people live in fear of what may happen tomorrow. They worry about things that may never come true. Some hesitate to take action because they are afraid of failure. But the only thing that truly matters is what one does now. If a person works earnestly in the present, the future will naturally take shape. One cannot control what will happen tomorrow, but one can control what is done today. A fulfilling life is not built on endless planning for the future, but on making the best of each day. A person who dedicates themselves fully to the present moment will naturally find that their actions lead to a meaningful and fulfilling future without needing to obsess over it. The young man then asked if living in the present meant ignoring responsibilities. If someone stopped worrying about the future, wouldn't that lead to laziness? The philosopher laughed and explained that living earnestly in the present does not mean living without direction. It means giving full effort to whatever one is doing at this moment. Whether it's working, studying, or even spending time with loved ones, one must do it with complete sincerity. When people live half-heartedly, always thinking about something else, they do not truly experience life. But when they give their full attention to the present, every moment becomes meaningful. Even small, ordinary things become special. A person who washes dishes with full awareness and appreciation is experiencing life just as fully as someone who achieves great success. The value of an action comes from the sincerity and focus brought to it. The young man was beginning to understand, but one final question remained. If people do not focus on the past or future, how can they find purpose? The philosopher answered that purpose is not something that is given by others. It is something that each person must decide for themselves. Many people believe that their lives should follow a certain path, dictated by society or tradition. But true purpose is not about meeting expectations. It is about doing what brings genuine fulfillment. The only way to know what that is to live fully in the present. When people stop being controlled by past regrets and future worries, they become free to discover what truly matters to them. True purpose is found in the act of living itself, not in reaching some final goal. It is not something to be achieved later. It is something to be created every single day through sincere action. The night grew late, and the conversation was coming to an end. The young man sat quietly, absorbing everything he had learned. He realized that he had spent much of his life either regretting the past or fearing the future. But now he understood that life was happening right now, in each breath, in each step. He finally saw that happiness was not something to chase, but something to experience in every moment. He looked at the philosopher with newfound clarity. He no longer needed to ask anything more. He had found his answer. The only thing left to do was to start living, not tomorrow, not someday, but right now.